So today, Genealogy Jumpstart's topic is all about probate records. Just a reminder, I am not a lawyer, as I mentioned during our last session on court records. So I'm going to do my best to explain the legal stuff. I'm a bit more comfortable with probate records than all the different court records. So we'll see how this goes. But just a reminder that, just like you guys, I'm a genealogist and just primarily interested in probate because of my ancestors. So, if you're not familiar with what probate is, it is basically a legal process for administering a deceased person's estate. So, their real estate or their property and their personal estate or all their possessions that they own are going to be distributed to their heirs, whether or not there is a will. So, a lot of people, when they think about probate, they think, oh, there's a will. Probates and wills are not the same thing. Some people might use those words interchangeably, but a will is basically just one document that might be found in your probate file for an ancestor. So that will is going to outline basically what you want done with your property and all the stuff you own and how you want that distributed. If you want to give it to your spouse, you want to give it to your kids, your grandkids, whoever. So during the probate process, the court needs to figure out, is there a will and is that will legally valid? So that's why they're going through the probate process to make sure that they're doing what is right according to the laws and according to what the person has stated in their will. But of course, people sometimes die without a will. So we're talking about both how to research those who didn't have a will and those who did have a will. So you hear the words testate and intestate. So testate means that a valid will and testament existed for a person. So what the probate process is then, it's really authenticating that will, making sure that, hey, yes, it is a valid will. They didn't write this under undue stress or somebody didn't forge their name or anything like that. And the person who's writing the will before their death, they would name an executor to carry out their instructions. So that's just the person who's managing their estate after they're gone. If they die without a will, that's intestate. So the court needs to decide how to distribute the estate for that person. So then that probate process basically appoints somebody called an administrator to act in place of that executor and distribute all the assets according to state law. So you might be wondering, well, why do I care for genealogy? Well, it's going to help you establish some relationships for your ancestors. So a lot of times in a will or in a probate record, you see spouses listed, you see children, siblings, nieces, nephews, all kinds of different family relationships. Might even give you that married name of one of your female ancestors, one of the daughters of that person, or the maiden name of the wife because they listed, brothers-in-laws or something like that. So it can help establish those relationships for you. You can also use probates or wills as an alternative source in absence of other records. So perhaps maybe no death record exists. You can't find one. It's before that time period when vital records were mandated. Well, this probate record proves that that person died. It helps you narrow down that time period. Sometimes they even give you an exact date of death. A lot of times I've found exact dates of death in probate records. Also, like I just mentioned, with establishing relationships, maybe there's no birth record for a child of your ancestor, but in their will, they're writing, I'm giving to my son so and so. That's proving a relationship. It could also help you determine if you have the right ancestor. So you might find some similar names or same names of people, and you start researching that person, and all of a sudden you see, oh, that doesn't make sense because it's, the same name, but a different person. So looking through kind of all the context clues that you have in a probate record will determine if you're searching the right person or not. You also get some context for their lives, and it could point you to some additional records that you can then research, such as, figuring out their economic status, learning about any property they owned, and then you can follow up with the land records, which we're going to talk about next month. Any religious records, perhaps once you get that date of death, maybe now you can find where in the church books their death might have been recorded. Also, don't forget that women sometimes did have probate as well, even those historic women. They do sometimes have less of a paper trail than our male ancestors, but depending on the state laws and especially property rights for women at the time of her death is going to determine if she has a probate record or not. And it also depends on if she survives her spouse or not. So don't forget to look for those female ancestors as well. Couple important things to note. We're really focusing on United States probate records. That is going to be governed by state law, but it is administered at the county level. So you're going to find probate records in the court records at the county, wherever that estate is being settled. Probate laws, of course, are going to vary state to state. So something in Wisconsin is going to be different than Florida or Pennsylvania. So you need to understand what the probate laws are in that specific area where that ancestor is dying and during that specific time period that your ancestor is living, because they might have changed in that state throughout time. So something that's true today might not have been true in 1880, for example. Not every ancestor left a probate record or a will. They estimate that only about 10% of the pre-1900 adult population made wills, and those were usually males that owned property. So, if you're searching for ancestors that are before 1900, realize it's a small percentage that are actually leaving wills. There might be a couple reasons why you might not find a probate record because not everybody did do probate. Maybe they didn't own any property, so they had nothing to give. Maybe they had property, but it was in a different county, so they would have had probate in that county instead of the county that they died in. So, maybe you're just searching in the wrong place. Maybe their probate was delayed. So sometimes they might have given all of their, possessions and real estate to their spouse. And so probate maybe didn't happen until their spouse died, or they transferred the property before they died. And then, probate process happened through somebody else in the family, essentially. Maybe they intentionally avoided probate for whatever reason. Or maybe you just have the wrong death date or the wrong person and you're looking in the wrong place. If you can't find a probate record for your direct ancestors, I also want to encourage you to look at the relatives. So look at those siblings, look at the children, look at the aunts, the uncles, especially those that are unmarried and childless, because they're giving their possessions and real estate to somebody usually in the family. So your ancestor might be mentioned in their records as well. Or even if you do find probate records of your direct ancestors, don't neglect looking at those other ones as well. The probate process could also take years. You think, hey, the person dies and a couple months later their probate's settled. Not always the case. A lot of times, if they had minor children surviving them, the probate process doesn't close out until all of those minor children are of age. So it could be 10 years, could be 12 years. It could be a very lengthy time period. Maybe for whatever reason there was a dispute over the will, so they call it a contested will. So maybe it's a long process that they're having to go back and forth in court in order to solve that. Or maybe at some point they discovered, hey, there's this additional piece of property that we weren't aware of at the beginning of the probate process. So it kind of extends the probate process as they have to deal with that piece of property then. Not every child or descendant, or sometimes even a widow, might be listed in the probate. Some might not mention their specific names. They might just mention my wife or my children. They might name a son-in-law instead of the daughter who is married to him. So sometimes you don't always get the best clues, but you got to work with what you're given. And it might also be hard to determine those relationships if it's not expressively written, because it might just list the names of all the people, and you've got to kind of use other records to determine how that person's related or prove those relationships. Of course, a big myth everybody seems to think is all the heirs are going to be left something in the will. Of course, you're not going to leave out one of your kids. If you have four kids, you're going to give something to all of them. Not always the case. Maybe they had reasons for that, or maybe they were given things before that death happened that the other kids didn't get things before the death happened. Who knows? We never know the situation. The lengths of the wills and the probate records are also going to vary widely depending on what's happening. I found a statistic or a little factoid that said the longest will on record was believed to be 2,216 pages. So it's quite the extensive probate or will that they left. I'm not sure if they left like multiple books that they had written or what, but that is quite a long will. And then the shortest one was just 4 words, all to my wife. So there's short and sweet and very long. You might get somewhere in the middle. And then again, remember that will is just one piece of the probate process and the probate packet. Of course, there's some fun legal terms as you're gonna dive into these probate records. You probably have no clue what some of these terms mean. I know I didn't when I started researching probate records. So I always encourage you to head to the Family Search Wiki. It's a link in your handout for you. So what I usually do here is there's a whole spot that says it's a glossary of United States probate terms. So if you're like, okay, what is administrator? Then that's what this means. What does affinity mean? Or what does bequest mean? Or bond? You can look at all the different terms that you might see as you're reading through this probate to figure out what the heck it means in a little bit more layman's terms. You can also always check legal definitions by using Google, just searching what is guardianship or whatever. Or there's something called Black's Law Dictionary, which we looked at last month when we talked about court records. There's a whole book called Black's Law Dictionary, or there's a website where you can again search those legal terms, get a little bit more information on what it is. I also really like this book called The Researcher's Guide to American Genealogy. The fourth edition's the latest edition, even though it's a little out of date, almost 10 years now. But they have a lot of really great legal terminology related to probate records in Chapter 16. So I encourage you to check that out if you like. So now we're going to go into some of the steps in the probate process. So they're going to vary just slightly depending on if that will exist or if it doesn't exist. And then they're also going to vary a little bit depending on the time period, the place, and individual circumstances that our ancestor would have been through, because not everybody's life and possessions and things are the same. Again, always be sure to check what laws are in effect in that area, when and where that probate occurred. But basically, during the probate process, they keep all of these records related to that probate in what's called a probate file or a probate packet. So these are basically just loose papers that are rarely in any sort of order, at least that I've kind of discovered, of all the different steps that are taken during the probate process. So when you look through this probate packet, you might see things that are out of order. I always recommend kind of going through each piece of the paper and kind of making like a little timeline or maybe organizing those papers in kind of a chronological date order. And then you can kind of follow the process or lay out the process kind of and show you some examples of what these records look like as well. So first, we're going to talk about what to do if there is a will. So again, that's testate. So basically, before that person dies, they're going to write a will. They are professing that they are of sound mind, of age, and not under undue influences. During that will, they're going to outline how they would like their property and other assets distributed. Again, they can have however, they would like that done in however many words they would like that done. They're usually going to name an executor of the will that's going to carry out their wishes after they're gone. But during that probate process, that person that they name can either decline to accept that, or maybe they actually die before the other person that they're supposed to be the executor for. So then the court needs to appoint somebody called an administrator that will serve as an executor. There's also something called an unsolemn will, which does not list an executor. So again, the court is going to appoint somebody to be in charge of administering that estate. Of course, a will could be written many days or weeks or years before a person died. There could be multiple versions of a will, and kind of each new one supersedes the previous ones. So always kind of be sure to, check. You might be looking many years in advance, or it could be just days or weeks in advance of their death. So I've got an example of a will here. I just wanted to point out it was filed in 1868, so this is when he would have written it, and then he didn't die for a few years until 1871. But I found this on ancestry.com. This is one of my ancestors that lived in Iowa, and so his will is going to be right here. So it's, pretty lengthy, but they're all kind of, different, but it kind of always starts the same. The last will and testament of so and so of this location. And then they say, I'm of sound mind, and I make this my last will and testament. So then he's talking about, oh, I'm appointing so and so as my executor. And then he's going into, okay, this is what's going to happen to my property. This is what my son's going to get. This is what my wife's going to get. They have certain kind of stipulations. If they're talking about land, they're giving a legal land description, which we'll dive into legal lands and all the land descriptions and stuff next month when we talk about land records. But that's important to know the legal land description if you're going to find land records later. So again, you just kind of, can read through this. Of course, a lot of these are going to be handwritten. So you get to hopefully figure out what it says in the whole will. And then it goes on and on about, what gets distributed to each person. So and so gets this. And they might be multiple pages. So this one's, already on the third page here. And then at the end, they sign it and they date it. So that's essentially a will. Later on in time, you sometimes also get what's called a common form will. So basically, it was like a template that our ancestors used and kind of filled in the blanks, essentially. Again, pointing out that this will was filed in 1924 and he didn't die until 1930. So again, the will's kind of filed sometimes many years in advance. So if we look at this one's actually typed, which is nice. But again, it kind of starts very similar to all the other ones, where it gives that name, that location. They're saying they're of sound mind and all that stuff. And then they're laying out their wishes of what the wife gets, what happens to the property, the names of the children, all that kinds of great stuff. You're seeing, the names of the spouses of these female children as well. And then appointing that executor, signing and dating at the end, and then they usually have some sort of witness who is subscribing to say, yep, this person did this in my presence, so it is valid. So then, of course, many days or weeks or years could happen. That person eventually is going to die. So that executor or some other person who might be interested in their estate is going to file a petition, which starts the whole probate process. So what happens is the court then admits the will to probate, and they schedule a hearing to figure out, is this will valid? So what they need to do in order to let everybody know that there's a will being read is they need to publish a notice of hearing, usually in a newspaper. So you might see a lot of those in the newspaper, and I'll show you an example in a few minutes. They also publish a notice to creditors. So if this person owes money to people, those people need to know that this person died. And if you want to claim your money that you're owed, this is when we're going to talk about it. So they give those people who have an interest in that estate an opportunity to come forward. More things can happen depending on the individual circumstances before this kind of hearing happens. And multiple things can happen on the same day. Maybe they appoint a guardian ad litem, which is kind of like somebody who serves in place of somebody. Like a minor child, maybe they can't speak for themselves or they don't know all the legalese and stuff. So they appoint a guardian ad litem to serve on behalf of that child. So maybe that happens and maybe the notice of hearing is published on the same day, or maybe there's lots of other things that are happening. Again, as you kind of go through each individual probate packet, you figure out what days all the things are happening on and kind of make a little timeline for yourself. So this is what those people would file is this petition for proof of will. So this is after this person dies now. This looks like his wife is going to file it saying this person died on this date, in this time, this place. the name executor resigned, so I am going to file on this behalf of the family, and I have an interest in this because I'm the wife. We've got all these kids. These are all people who are interested as well. And sometimes you get the ages because at this point there are minor children, so they're not of age. So they are going to be listed there with their dates. Or sometimes you get a date of birth, sometimes just a year. They're going to give an estimate of that value of that property. She's going to sign, and of course, the court is saying, yep, we recognize that she filed this on this date at this time. Then they fill out this little notice to prove the will and notice to creditors. So again, it's saying, hey, we're going to have this special term on the second Tuesday of December in 1930. That's when we're going to read out the will and make sure that anybody who, wants to contest it is there and can say anything they want to prove or not prove that it's a valid will. So it's kind of giving that date and time when they're going to have that court hearing. And then, like I mentioned, they have to publish a legal notice in the newspaper. So you'll see an example of that over here. I'm sure you've probably seen it in the newspaper as well. Usually they have to run it for quite a few weeks. So this one, it says they ran it for 3 consecutive weeks. And then, of course, the publisher is charging for that. So eventually the estate will have to pay that $7.20 for running this. But it's basically just saying, hey, if you have any interest in this person's estate, this is the date that we're meeting at the courthouse. So if you have any, money that you're owed, you want to come here on this date and let us know. So then that hearing happens. That will is going to be presented for probate before the proper judicial authority to show that it's valid. So if no one comes forward and says, no, I don't think this is a valid will, then it's going to be proved in court and certified as valid. And they actually issue a certificate that's in the probate packet proving that that will is valid. If there's any sort of dispute, if it's contested, the procedure of like figuring that out varies state to state, but usually they have a lawsuit that's filed, so that executor is named as a defendant, and they have to basically prove why the will is not valid. There's going to be lots of additional hearings and additional paperwork in that probate file, then discussing kind of what happens during that, lawsuit and all the contesting and all that. But basically, the court is then going to issue a letters testamentary, if that will is valid, to the executor of the will. So it's basically you are given legal authorization to continue with the probate process and kind of settling this person's estate and going through the whole probate process. So here is the certificate of proof of will that you might find in the probate packet saying, yep, we proved that this is a valid will, and this person for sure died and they wrote their will. Then the person who is the executor is going to get this letters testamentary. So it's basically, again, just listing her as the executor of this estate on this date that they had the hearing. Again, saying that person resigned, who was originally named executor, going through all this fun legalese and things like that. The judge is signing it, saying, yep, she has authorization to now settle the probate and go through the process. After that happens, they have to pay a recording fee. So the will is then recorded and registered with the court. That executor who is in charge of that estate has to post a bond and proceeds to pay the obligations of the deceased. So if they're owed money or somebody's owed money, they're paying off that person. The bond amount that they have to pay is going to vary depending on how valuable the estate is. Obviously, the higher the value of the estate, the higher the bond. They want to make sure this executor is not going to run off with all the money. During this process, they also might take an inventory of all the things that this person owns. They might make appraisals of things as well, of the property to figure out the exact value. As they're paying off the obligations of the estate, those creditors are getting a receipt that they sometimes then include in the probate packet as well, saying, yep, I received this $20 I was owed, here's the receipt, and that's put in the probate packet to prove that it was paid. So the estate kind of continues to, settle all the things. Maybe they have to sell property because they don't have enough money to satisfy all the creditors that are owed, if they have any debts like that. So you might get additional paperwork for that if that's something that happened with your ancestor or not. So you'll see something like this bond of administration. So this is saying, what she had to pay in order to kind of be on the hook for this estate. So again, you're getting kind of all the dates and the names and all the things here that you can read through, talking all about the fun legalese things that is just basically saying, yep, I'm on the hook for this and I'm gonna, do what I'm supposed to do to settle the estate. Here's an example of an inventory. So they're going to have to inventory what real estate is owned by this person. So again, talking about the person who's deceased, who's administering it. They have people who help appraise or inventory the things that are listed here. They've got a date, and then they've got these legal land descriptions, and then the values of those legal land descriptions. And sometimes these might be on more than one page. And then they sometimes have one for the real estate and then some for the personal property. Like if they had lots of furniture or some sort of, things that were valuable, they would list those in the personal property part. Again, kind of as those people who are owed money are satisfied. So, for example, this person said, I was owed $450 from this guy when he died and 5% interest. So now I'm paid. Here's the receipt showing that it's paid. So this goes in the probate packets showing that they took money from the estate to pay this person and pay that debt off. So once they pay all those debts, that executor is then going to file a petition saying they're ready to give what's called the final account to close out the probate process. So an order for notice of final settlement is issued by the court. And again, they have notices printed in the newspaper, naming the date the final settlement will occur. So again, this kind of gives one last opportunity for anybody who has any stake in this estate to come forth and make their claim known if they haven't already. The executor is going to give what's called their final account to the court on a specific date. So they're saying, here's what we did with all the money. Here's the creditors that we paid off. Here's what's left. If there's anything left, here's what we plan to do with that, all that kind of stuff. And then the court is going to issue a notice of final settlement, basically closing the probate process. So now all the debts are paid, the court has given approval. Now all the specific provisions that that person laid out in their will can be carried out as stipulated. If there's any money left, after all that debt's been paid, maybe X gets left to the wife, X gets left to the kids, the grandkids, whatever that person said in their will. So here is going to be an example of that petition and account. So she's basically saying, hey, I'm ready to proceed with a final settlement of the estate. And she's signing it that date. And so is the court commissioner. So some of this stuff is just like boring, kind of dry paperwork where you might not get lots of cool genealogy things, but here's an example of a final settlement where she's going to be listing out, hey, these are the debts that were owed. I paid off that amount. These are the credits. So these are, money that we have or the expenses that were paid during administering this estate, paying for those publishing notices, paying for a guardian ad litem, paying the attorneys, all that kind of stuff. So they're basically listing out what happened with all the money. And then again, that court is going to issue this order for the final settlement. So again, saying this person is administering the estate. We've got this date and time picked for that hearing. And we're running a notice weekly in the newspaper. And that register and probate is signing off on that. Again, they're going to publish that newspaper clipping all about the notice of final settlement. So you'll see, again, it's running for multiple weeks for certain dates. And then finally, that court is going to issue this order closing the probate. So again, you get all this fun stuff. Date when it's closed out. These kids were all minors at the time, so they were given a guardian ad litem. So it's talking about what's left over in the probate, what the property is, all that kind of stuff. And so sometimes these continue on for multiple pages. So you get to read through all of this and see, what else is going to happen with the remainder of the estate. And then eventually at the end, the court signs off on it. So again, depending on your ancestor-specific situation, you might find other probate records or other types of papers in your probate packet, but you just never know. Some probate packets might be 20 pages or 30 pages, some might be over 100 or 200. It really depends on the individual circumstances. So again, what I usually do is I kind of make a timeline of what's going on, writing out a summary of what's happening. I'll also show you in just a minute on Family Search. If you didn't notice on the right-hand side, they have these AI-generated summaries now, where it kind of helps you understand, okay, what does this piece of paper mean? What are these legal definitions? Where you can kind of, get a little snapshot of what's happening without having to understand all the legal stuff. Of course, AI is still so new. You definitely want to still read through things yourself, make sure that what it's telling you is correct, because it still could be wrong. It's still in its infancy, but really nice that that is an option. So this is essentially what I did with my ancestor. We just looked through a bunch of examples in his probate packet, but this is what happened. 1924, he files his will. He dies in 1930. All these things happen. So these are all papers in that probate packet, and I listed out the page numbers in the electronic file. And then all the way down here in 1935, that's when the estate is finalized. So it did take about 5 years for the whole probate process to happen. All these multiple pages. I think, yeah, his was 111 pages total that I had to go through and read through one by one and figure out what it was and try to put it in order. There's also cool things. So, like, I found there was a page of testimony from a hearing. So it's the judge interviewing his wife, which is really helpful. It's, confirming, yeah, you're the widow. Here's all the children listed. Is that child married? So it's kind of getting some of that genealogical information that's really helpful, that you might also get in a probate packet. Any questions before we move on to what happens if there's not a will? Yes.
I have a will. I'm not sure. I haven't proven that it's actually a relative, but when they did an inventory, they inventoried even down to like how many handkerchiefs he had.
Yeah.
And then he had minor children, and every time one of the minor children reached maturity, they had to file documentation to take them off, and then they had to change the guardian halfway through. So there's an awful lot in there.
A lot of fun things can happen throughout the whole process. You never know. Or like maybe the guardian that was appointed to them died or something. You never know what kind of unique situations are going to have, which is why every probate packet is going to be completely different. So
very interesting.
Yeah.
If that's the case and minor children have to have another guardian appointed, what happens if they're out of the state? Like say it was filed here in Wisconsin, say in O'Connell County, and then their guardian, they move with them to Minnesota. And that guardian passes, would they file stuff in Minnesota or have to come back to Wisconsin?
No, the probate process would happen all in Wisconsin.
That has to come
Yeah. Yeah. I would assume that's where the jurisdiction is in Wisconsin. So
Does it go by the county where you filed the will or where you died?
where you own property. So if you don't own property and you just have like your possessions, then it would be where they died. Otherwise, so like if they have property in multiple places, they might have a little probate packet in that other county too, where they own, or sometimes they're kind of put it all together at the kind of main county as well. It really depends. Some states are different. Some states, do that. Some states don't. So you might need to dig a little. You might get it all in one little handy packet. Any online questions here? Let's see. How could they intentionally avoid probate? Good question. Um, I've heard it happen, so I'm not sure. Probably breaking the law in some way. I don't know. That's a good question for a lawyer. So their question is, a will is filed in advance of the death. I thought it was opened and read after death. So this person is writing their will beforehand, and they're obviously filing it with the court to have that copy of that will on file with the court. Um, I don't think, it might depend on like if the family gets to see what the will says before that person dies or not. Again, time period. Maybe they used to do that back then, and now they don't open and read the will until after death now. It, again, really depends on time period, location, all that kind of stuff. But the will is always filed in advance of the death.
For that 19th century will that you showed us first, did you get all the AI translations and stuff for that one and as much detail on that handwritten one as you did with the one from the 1920s and
So
30s?
the will that I showed you before that was handwritten, that was on Ancestry. So they don't have an AI yet that I'm aware of. But Family Search, if I would have found that on Family Search, they do try to have like a transcription of that handwritten, but it's not always 100% accurate. So I would always double check, reading the words and reading that transcription as well, just to make sure that it's all there. What happens if they have sold property and moved since filing the will? I'm not sure what you mean. Who sells the property and moves? The executor, they are welcome to move and sell the property. It's all going to be detailed in that probate packet. Where do you look for laws regarding probate, county or state? I believe they're under the state. How do you find a will in other states? You can start with the Family Search Wiki. So what I would always do is go to Family Search Wiki and I would type in the state that I'm looking for and probate records. So say, for example, Arizona probate records. If there's any online resources, it's going to give you a link. So it's saying, hey, we've got probates and wills from 1803 to 1995 at Ancestry. If you have a subscription, might be on the free library edition as well, but this is going to link to the paid version. So you'd have to kind of go try to find that Arizona collection through Ancestry Library Edition if you wanted to do the free version. And then it's saying, hey, in our full text search at Family Search, we have some probate records as well. So this is how you can find, you can even do this for other locations, other states, other countries. So this kind of gives you a little bit of background. Some of them are a little detailed, some of them are kind of just short, but it gives you, a little bit of information because again, each state's going to be different, depending on what's going on. All right. Any more questions here before we move on? If no will, it is called intestate. Yes. Is there a timeline for when a probate record becomes public or is it immediate? It's going to depend on the state. Each state has their own laws on when they let probate become public or not. I would assume at some point after the probate being settled, it would be public record, but again, depends on each individual state. All right, let's see what happens when there's no will. So again, process might vary slightly just depending on the time, the place that probate occurs. But essentially, it's similar to what happens if there is a will. A person usually who has an interest in this person's estate, usually the person who wants to administer the estate is going to petition the court. So it's usually some sort of family member or someone with a vested interest in that case. They're going to come to the court and say, hey, this person died, they had no will. I want to settle their estate for them. They're going to have a hearing in court where administration rights are going to be granted by a court. Then that administrator is going to have bond posted, just like an executor would have to post bond. They're going to still publish that notice to creditors and debtors in the newspaper, giving those people a chance to come forward and claim anything they're owed. They're still going to do that inventory and appraisal of any of that property or possessions. There's still going to be sale or distribution of things if they need to sell stuff in order to satisfy those creditors and debtors. There's still going to be all kinds of records kept, like they have different reports that they have to file with the probate office. Sometimes they have to do annual settlements, kind of showing, hey, this is what we did this quarter or this year with this estate as we're working through the whole probate process. Once everything's all settled, they're going to give a final settlement. And then again, if there's anything left over, they can distribute the rest to the heirs that person would have. So, of course, it kind of goes in a specific order usually, like the spouse, the children, grandchildren, kind of stuff like that. And then again, you might find some of those releases or receipts from different creditors and any of the heirs, if they received anything, they would have some sort of receipt, or they would say, I, give up my right to have anything else from the estate. So again, we're going to have lots of fun, legal things here. So this is an example of what's called letters of administration. So this is basically a document that says, hey, this person has the right to handle the affairs of the estate. So again, this is only if a will is not present. So this person is filing that. So if we zoom in here, it's saying Joseph Stilp is the deceased. This person, J.A. Kronzer of Appleton, is going to file a petition to become that administrator because he has some sort of vested interest. So it's saying this person died on this date and there was no will. This is kind of what I guess the value is going to be of what they own. These are the people who might be owed something, who are heirs of that person. And then he's kind of filing this petition with the court saying, hey, can I be administrator of this estate? Sometimes they have to have a hearing on this application. So you'll see again some different testimony. So this person who wants to be administrator is being interviewed by the court. So they're saying, yeah, you live in Appleton. Did you know this person your whole life? What was kind of the nature of your relationship? When did this person die? Where did this person die? Did they have kids? Did they have wife? So you're getting kind of some of that genealogical information and figuring out who is this Joseph guy? Because I don't recognize his name or whatever. So kind of reading through all those little details, you'll get some of that information. Then they're going to give out an order for appointment and bond for the administrator. So again, they're saying, yep, you can be the administrator of this estate, and you have to pay some money just to prove that you're on the hook for it. And then, of course, there might be some other records in this probate packet. So they might have documentation of the different assets that they distributed. So different receipts for the money received, or if they sold property in order to pay off any of those people that they owed money. They might have had to have an estate sale. So they would have had to have a list of who bought all the items, what was paid for. Maybe there's going to be petitions for guardianship of children if those children are minors, or they would have had to have a guardian ad litem appointed for them. There's going to be listing of the heirs and their relationships to that person. There might be a decree of distribution, which that executor fills out or that administrator fills out to show this is how we distributed all the things to those people that were owed something in this estate. I also found something like this. This is a different probate packet, but this was a petition to determine descent of lands. So Jacob dies without a will. They need to determine who all of his legal heirs are and what their interest in is in the land that he owned. So it's going to list out his property. It's going to list out who his children are, who his wife is, all that kind of stuff. So George is the administrator of the will. This is the person who died, when they died. This person is a son of the person who died. These are the people that are surviving. So he's got a widow and a bunch of children. He has land in the town of Bovina, and this is the kind of legal land description of it. So they're just basically saying, hey, we have this piece of property. These are the people who have an interest in that property. I also wanted to point out the difference in if you go see an original file or if you see the scanned file that you might find online. So this is an example on the left of the original file that I found at the UW Green Bay Archives for this estate that was an Oconto County probate record for my second great-grandfather. So this is a receipt, and you can see how beautiful it is in color, and then the black and white version that's on Family Search. So certain things, you can't quite pick out all the detail of this little stamp. Some things, are just fine to read in that black and white version, but it's kind of cooler to see the real version if you can. So I know we went through all the kind of examples really quick, but some of the things that you might find in probate packets as you read through all the things are these things. Of course, there's no guarantee you're going to find any of this or all of this, but some common things that you find in there is going to be that death date of that person because that executor or that administrator has to prove this person died. Otherwise, we can't go through with probate. So sometimes you even get death dates of other people, like a spouse or children who might have predeceased them. Or you can even narrow down a time period of when those people died based on what's happening in the probate process. So maybe if that father died and it says, one of the children predeceased them or the wife, then their death happened before that time period. Of course, hopefully you get those relationships or the different heirs. Again, might include their names. Usually they also list a place of residence, so where they're living in that time period, so you can then go follow up in that area, find some records on them. Might list those children and even grandchildren, especially if a child predeceased those parents. You're going to get names of associates and friends of that person who died. So there's different appraisers, there's different creditors and debtors, there's bondsmen, there's administrators, there's buyers at sales. So these are all people who might have known your ancestor or had some sort of involvement with your ancestor, or there's going to be witnesses to some of these things that maybe they're related somehow or they're friends somehow. Might list a possible occupation. You can see kind of their economic status based on, the value of all their things or the inventory of all the things that they might have. Sometimes you get medical information, like how that person died or what happened, especially in those kind of like testimonies or the like interviews with the people during the court case. They might provide some detail that, you wouldn't have known if you hadn't read through that. Approximate ages of minor children. Again, sometimes they do list an exact birth date, especially as that child comes of age. You might see an exact birth date for those children. If you have an ancestor who was literate and they didn't just sign with an X, you also get an original signature of your ancestor, which is pretty cool, that you can see what their signature looked like if they signed their will, for example. Or, if it's the spouse being the executor or the administrator, you get to see their signature. Or a child, you get to see their signature. So now you might be wondering, well, how do I find these probate records? Each state has a probate court. The names of the probate court isn't always straightforward as probate court. Because some states decide they have non-county probate jurisdictions. So for example, Arizona, they have their probate records under Superior Court, whereas us in Wisconsin, we have our probate records under Circuit Court. So you might need to kind of search a little bit to find out what court actually has these probate records. So again, kind of that first step that I always start with is going to that Family Search Wiki and searching for that state that I'm researching in. So a few minutes ago, we did Arizona. We can do like Utah probate records. So again, kind of any state that you're looking that your ancestor would have had probate in. It's always going to give you some links to some of the electronic resources that they might have, which is always really great. It's going to give you some background information and talk to you a little bit more in depth. You can see different probate cases or case files that are digitized online and other things like that. It also is telling you, oh, you might be able to find some additional ones in microfilm or in print. So here are some resources for you. So that's a good starting point to figure out if you might be able to find that probate record online. Before you can do that, of course, you want to know the county and the state where they had property, because probate, again, doesn't always happen where they specifically died. Maybe they were visiting somebody else and they died in a different county or a different state, but they owned property back here in Wisconsin. If they had probate or if they had property in multiple states, that probate process occurs in all those states. And also remember, boundary changes are also really important because you want to go with the county name that it was at the time of death, not what it currently is, because sometimes throughout history, they changed boundaries. So I'm going to show you in Heritage Quest, there's a great resource. We have this completely free through the Appleton Library. If you live in the state of Wisconsin, you have access to Heritage Quest for free. So how to get there, you start at our website, apl.org. Under Research and Learn, there's a genealogy and local history area. You click on that. It's going to give you a listing of all of those genealogy and local history databases. If we scroll down to Heritage Quest, right there it is. You can access this free from home, so you just click on this. At this point, it might ask you for your library card number, or if you don't have a library card, you can also select zip code and enter your Wisconsin zip code to get access to this from home. So now I'm in Heritage Quest. It's very simple. You just go up to the maps area up at the top here. And this is a map guide to the U.S. federal census. So this actually is a book as well, but they have digitized basically the content of the book and made it kind of an interactive map for you. So basically what you do is you find whatever state you want to. So say your ancestors lived in Iowa. You'd click on it and it's saying, okay, this is what Iowa looked like in 1840. So all the black is what current is in 1840, and all the white behind it is what it is currently in 2026. So you see in 1840, they have a lot of land that's not settled yet, and they just have a couple counties listed. But then when I click on 1850, you can see more of that land to the west is being settled now, and the different county names are changing. They've also got sometimes a little kind of more information, like what county was formed from what county and when, that you can kind of see those details. So you can kind of click through and see how things are changing and how that might affect where probate happens. Because if probate's happening during these time period, where the kind of county boundaries are changing, you want to be sure you're looking in the right county. I've also got another resource for you if you don't have access to Heritage Quest. It's called Map of US or Map of Us. It's another great resource where, again, it has it broken down by state. So this is a link in your handout, or you can just Google Map of Us or mapofus.org. Click on State Maps. If you scroll down, it's got a cool little map of the US as well. Again, you click on whatever state you're wanting to dive into further. It's going to give you a couple different options. They've got a couple things like state parks and all that fun stuff. But I always look for this one that says interactive history. So each of the states have one that says interactive history. You got to scroll down just a little bit because it wants to explain all the things for you. But now I'm here finally at the map. So this is showing me 1790. And this kind of gives me more options for years than that Heritage Quest, where it only gives you options for every 10 years. So I can say, hey, Wisconsin became a state in 1848. What did it look like at that time period? So you can see all the different counties. This one, it actually just kind of abbreviates the different counties, which is a little bit more difficult to figure out. But if you scroll down, you can see kind of what those abbreviations mean. It's also usually got a little explanation like, hey, Adams County was formed from Portage County, for example. And so again, you can kind of click through and see whatever time period it is that you're trying to look at that probate. What did the state look like at that time period? What are the county boundaries? Thankfully for us genealogists, many probate records, especially the historic ones, have been digitized and are available on the main genealogy site. So you'll find them on Ancestry, both the library edition and the paid subscription edition, and Family Search, which is completely free for everybody. Other sites like libraries, archives, genealogy societies might have some of these resources as well. Again, checking out that Family Search Wiki is going to link you to some of those specific collections that are online. So these probates that are online, they might have been indexed online, or they might only be indexed with just the person who's deceased and not all the heirs or the executors or the administrators. But thankfully, with this new magic of artificial intelligence, Family Search especially is making it easier than ever to find probate records because it's indexing all the words and being able to search all the words instead of just what is manually indexed by a person. So I'll show you quickly how it magically finds all the things. So you're going to want to be sure to be signed into your Family Search account. If you don't have an account, it's completely free to sign up for an account. So once you're signed in, go to Search and Full Text. So here I can put in a keyword, I can put in a name, a place, a year range, all that kind of great stuff. I usually always do keyword, even if it's a name. And if I have a specific name I'm searching for, I put it in quotation marks so that it knows to search this specific name together and not every instance of Richard and every instance of Garderbrecht. Then I'm going to click search. And I can see there's 64 results. So each of these things might be a different thing or it might be different pages, but you can see right away it's kind of highlighting in here where it sees that name. And then I can click on this and be brought into that page where it's going to show that name. So this is kind of one of those like inventory or like interview things that they would have had testimony in court where it's talking about this person. So you can see it's highlighted on the screen where his name appears. And on the right side here is where kind of the AI is trying to determine what it says over here. So this is when I would go through and double check. Is it saying exactly what it says over here? Is this completely correct? And this right up here where it says summarize the document, that's where I was mentioning before that it's kind of giving you a little AI thing. So it's saying, hey, this guy, he died, he lived in Oconto County. They executed a will that was witnessed by so-and-so. This guy was a resident of Suring. This guy was also co-witness. They did it at the Zahn's hardware store. This is the date that they executed that will, and then it's giving a little summary. It's saying it's a sworn testimony from this person regarding this execution of the last will and testament of that person. It's confirming he signed his will freely and was of sound mind. They both served as witnesses, observing his signature and each other's, and it was executed on October 16th at the Zahn's hardware store. So it's basically like giving a summary of what it says in this whole document over here. So again, I would still read through it, double check that that summary is correct because this is still new technology, but it should help you figure out some of these things. And you can do this on each page. So if I click on just another random other page, I can summarize this document. And again, it's going to give me a little, about the names and the relationships and the dates featured in this. And then it's going to give me a little summary. It's saying it's talking about the estate of him. and this is the probate process, and this is the person who's named executor, but it was later granted to so and so. She's posting a bond, kind of, et cetera, et cetera, that you can see kind of what's happening on this specific piece of paper. Any questions about the full text and AI summary stuff? Yeah, it's kind of cool, right?
Is there such a way of being able to take a document and putting it into an actual AI program?
Yeah, you can do that if you use AI, like an AI web. I mean, there's multiple AI websites where you can do that. Some are better than others, but you can, I mean, it depends on what you want to do with that document. Yeah, like if you want it to like summarize it, like if you had like, 10 scanned pages of something, you could upload it to, Chat GPT or whatever and say, summarize this document for me, and it might give you, a paragraph or two of what it's reading through that document.
So you'd have to have the document as a PDF or something and then put it into.
I think it could be image file too. I'm not sure. I've only done it as PDFs, but
Question bar.
yeah, there's a plus sign.
Hit the plus sign.
And
you can
upload
load
it.
In the document.
Yeah.
And then you can ask it to do whatever you want.
Yeah.
You can summarize it or rewrite it in such a way that sounds like you or.
Yeah.
A plus sign that is in like, say, Chat GPT.
Right.
Yes.
I've never seen any.
Yeah, so
stuff.
there's basically like a little text box where you can say, hey, rewrite this sentence for me or whatever you want it to. And then right next to it, there's a plus sign where you could upload something. So if you said, hey, I want to upload this historic photo because I don't know like what time period this might have been taken. So I can upload that photo, and then in the text box, I can write, give me a guesstimate of what time period this photo was taken, and then it will give you like a little like explanation of what it thinks that time period is and why. So there's certain things that it can do. I mean, again, take it, with a little grain of salt. It's not always 100% correct because it's still learning and things like that, but there are some useful tools that it can do for you.
See.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, of course. See if there's any other questions here. When I find a probate packet and it runs many pages, do I have to download each page individually, or can I download the complete packet at once? On Family Search and Ancestry, you have to download it page by page, unfortunately. So this Richard Gardbrick one that was 111 pages, I had to do 111 pages. Yep. Bummer.
But it was all free.
But it was all free and it was worth it, right? What happens if a creditor files for the will and the family contests it in court? If a creditor files for the will and the family contests it in court. I'm not sure what you mean. A creditor wouldn't file for the will. It would have to be like somebody else. I'd have never seen an instance where a creditor files for the will. Like somebody in the family would file for the will, and then the creditor would say, I'm owed this money. And then they would be satisfied in some way by, selling the property or whatever they had to do to get that money. Is it possible to get a library card if I don't live in Wisconsin? Unfortunately, not. We only in Wisconsin give out library cards for those who live in Wisconsin. So check with your local libraries and see if you're able to get library cards or what resources. Like here in Wisconsin, even though I live in Green Bay, I can have an Appleton card, I can have an Oshkosh card, I can have a Manitowoc card, I can have a card from anywhere in the state besides Madison and Milwaukee. So I can get access to lots of library resources that other libraries have that we don't have in Appleton. Is the will the same as trust? No, they are completely different things. At what point were women allowed to own property? My great-grandfather died in 1902, and the store they owned had to be held by two men. The children were all minors. It would depend on where the property was. So you'd have to look at the state laws at that time if women were allowed to own property or not in that state at that time. Let's see if there's anything in the chat here. Can you explain a holographic will? I cannot, but if we go to Black's Law Dictionary, they might be able to help us. So it's the lawdictionary.org. So if we type in holographic will, see what it says. What is a holographic will? Let's see. Saying a will is an essential legal document. Well, we know what a real will is, yeah. What does it say about holographic? What if somebody dies without? What are the different types of wills? Here we go. Holographic wills are handwritten wills that must be written and signed by the testator, so the person leaving the will. Ordinarily, a will is created with the help of an attorney, but in the case of holographic wills, no attorney is needed. The testator typically handwrites and signs the directive without legal representation. So it says they're not as popular or as simple or basic wills. However, they're a perfect option for individuals who want to leave instructions for the distribution of their assets and name their beneficiary. So again, you can kind of read through more of this. Does it need to be witnessed? All this kind of stuff that Black's Law Dictionary will tell you all about. That's what a holographic will is. Why would somebody want to be an administrator? Because somebody has to handle the probate process and they want to make sure it's done right. You know, they want to make sure that they're going to get what they're owed or their kids are going to get what they're owed. So that might be why you want to serve as an administrator. All right, let's see what else I got here. There are going to be international probate records. I did find some on Family Search. Like we just looked at that cool full text searching, with the exception of the US ones, Canadian ones, Australian ones, and New Zealand ones. The other international ones are not part of full text searching yet. But hopefully soon, Family Search will get those other international ones on there. But if you do happen to have ancestors in those 4 countries, take a look at the full text searching and hopefully you get lucky. The other way you can find those international collections is by going to that Family Search Wiki or going into the Family Search catalog or looking at some unindexed collections by location, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute, which is right now. All right, so once again, we're here at Family Search. We're going to go up to Search. And in order to get to the unindexed stuff, which is a good chunk of stuff that's on Family Search, we're going to go under Search and click on Images. So here I want to start my search with a specific place. So it could be a specific country, a specific state, specific county, specific city, whatever you want to put in here. I'm just going to start general and say Florida. Click on Search. And it's going to give me, look at, there's 14,000 collections that are unindexed related to Florida. If I really wanted to, I could narrow it down by a specific county in Florida. I can also narrow it down by date or by life event. So under life event, you're going to see all these kinds of things. If we're specifically looking for probate, we're going to look under legal. And so you can see they've got court records, they've got probate records, all that kind of stuff. So you can uncheck or check these boxes as you wish. Or if I just want to narrow it down to all the legal ones, I can leave that checked and be sure I hit update. So it's going to take those 12 or 13,000, however many it was, and bring it down to 1,700. So now I can see, you know, different things. Here's some guardianship indexes. Here's some probate administrator letters. Here's some probate indexes. Here's some probate estate case files. So you can see kind of time periods, locations. Sometimes if you scroll over to the side, it might give you a little bit more detail. Sometimes it says some names in here. Sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on what's here and what is not here. Anytime you find something that's like, hey, my ancestor lived in this place during this time period, I'd love to see if they have a probate record for this person, I would click on that and then be brought into this collection. And then the fun begins because you have to click through these pages and see what the writing is. You know, sometimes it's just, you know, fun stuff like that. Sometimes it's handwritten stuff that's really hard to read or easy to read. Sometimes they've got indexes in here that might tell you, hey, on page 216 is this person's will or this person's probate. So you kind of have to kind of hunt and peck throughout this to see, is it anything that you're looking for? You know, what kind of names are here? Is my ancestor's name one of these? Because this is all unindexed stuff, but this is actually tax records, it looks like in this part. But again, you can kind of go through all of these that might be relevant to that location and time period where your ancestor's living and see what's in here. So sometimes they've got like indexes at the beginning. So I'm trying to see if this is one of them. Yeah, so like here, it's saying, hey, we've got this person and it's going to be on these pages. So you might be able to go later on and see what page this is, or this might just be an index book. And then if I find an index for these cases, I would now have a page exactly of where that case appears. So maybe it's indexed or digitized somewhere else, and this is just the index. So it really depends on what's here and what is not here. So that's one way you can find some probate records. The other thing is through the catalog. So if we go under search, there's a catalog, just like there is a library catalog. This kind of lets you search and see what's available here. So again, you kind of start with a place. It could be a city, it could be a state. I'm going to go with Peoria County, Illinois. Click on search. First, it's going to break it down by category, so you can see all the things related to cemeteries, for example, or church histories. They've got one for probate, so if I go down to probate records, I can see there's looks like a book possibly, or there's probate case files for these certain time periods. So I can scroll down and see, oh, look at, they've got case files, these numbered. So maybe before, just a few minutes ago, I found what case file number in the index it is, and now I can see here are the case files that are digitized, and now be able to click on these images to go through and find that specific page where that case file is. You'll also see over here, they've got the full texting transcript. So this is part of full text searching. So if I didn't want to go through all of this, I can go into full text search and start searching a specific name like I just showed you a few minutes ago. And hopefully pull that up a lot easier and faster than going through page by page to find that specific case file. All right. In Ancestry, both the library edition and the paid edition, they organize their probate records first by state. They do also have some international probate databases on Ancestry. Again, it's basically UK, Australia, Ireland, and Scotland that I was able to find on the library edition. I don't have the world edition of Ancestry, so I don't know what other international countries they might have on there. I did want to point out, be careful of the dates that you see on the databases. So they're very misleading. So you might see something like Arizona probates from 1800 to 1987. Well, that doesn't mean that every single probate record from 1800 to 1987 is in there. They might only have a portion of it. They might have 10 cases from 1800 and 10 cases from 1987, and they're saying, oh, this is the long time period that we covered. They might not have every single record. Maybe they don't have all the counties for that state represented in that collection. Maybe that court house lost their records due to a fire, or maybe they haven't digitized them yet, or maybe they're available somewhere else, like offline or through a different website. Maybe they're still working on digitizing specific counties for that state. So it's not always every single thing is going to be in there. I also always recommend browsing through the specific county if you can't find your ancestor by a name search, because not all the records have been indexed, or they might have been indexed incorrectly. So maybe they have an initial instead of a first name listed, or maybe that last name's really badly misspelled because they read it incorrectly. Or maybe they only have an index that's indexed. So, that A to Z kind of listing of, hey, this person's will is on page 216. Well, maybe just the A to Z kind of index is what's digitized, and you'd have to go find where page 216 is then in the scanned stuff. So I'll show you how to find some probates through Ancestry Library Edition. Ancestry Library Edition is only available free inside the library. You're welcome to bring your own computer. Again, we're going to start at the APL website, go under that Research and Learn, under Genealogy and Local History. And then it's the first one, Ancestry Library Edition. So from here, I always like to start with the card catalog because that's how my librarian brain thinks. So I go under search and I go to card catalog. So here I can type in either a keyword or a title, or I can use these filters on the left-hand side to narrow down stuff. So for example, I could put probate in there. They've also recently added this include similar terms thing. I would play with it, turn it on and off. Like, see, right now it's got 655 collections that deal with probate in the category. But if I click this on, come on, buddy, you worked before. There we go. And then I search again, it goes to 662. So play with it off and on and see what results you get if you're not finding what you're looking for. Now I want to turn you off. It's a little temperamental sometimes. But here I can see all the different, states or countries that are represented. I can sort it by relevance. I can sort it by collection title. I can sort it by the date it's been updated or added or the record count. I can do all kinds of things here. So again, I can kind of narrow stuff down. Like if it's giving me census stuff and I ask for probate, like that doesn't make sense to me. So I want to narrow down to the court stuff. Now it's going to narrow down a little bit more toward, I've only got 158 different collections here. And so I can kind of scroll through and see, I can even narrow it down by location, or I can narrow it down by dates. If you're looking for a specific state, you can narrow it down to a specific state. So now I can see, oh, here's the Wisconsin wills and probates record. And again, this 1800 to 1987 is very misleading. I also want to encourage you to scroll down here to the bottom and read this little collection description because it's going to tell you certain things, like what you might find in here. It also sometimes will tell you like, hey, we're missing such and such county, or we're missing, this time period to this time period. So certain things like that that you need to know before you start diving into that collection, they sometimes point out here, but not always. So this says Wisconsin, wills and probates from 1800 to 1987. So you would assume, hey, it's got every county in Wisconsin, right? Wrong. It doesn't have Calumet County, for example. It doesn't have Oconto County, for example. So you can see not all of however many 72 counties or whatever we have are represented, but they've got some of them. So you can either choose a county and start looking to see what they have for that county. So like Fond du Lac, for example, I can see they've got different probate case files for certain things. So maybe I have a probate case file number from an index that I found somewhere and I can find that specific part. Or maybe I just want to search a name. So you can search in here and just type in that name. And now I can see here are some results. And it's really cool that it kind of gives you a little table of contents for each of these. So if I just want to dive right into a certain part of that probate packet, I can. Or I can just dive right into the whole thing by clicking View Record and then pop it up here. So this is kind of the beginning. Usually all the probate packets, at least for Wisconsin, kind of start with this file folder. And then these are going to be the individual pages of the probate packet. So this is, the probate number, where it's recorded, all that kind of stuff. And then I can go page by page, look through all the things. These are all pieces of the probate packet that is unique and individual to this person. And it might be 10 pages, it might be 200 pages. So I can go through and save it and read through it as I would like. If you're on Ancestry Library Edition, if you click on here, save to this computer, and you can save it to the computer, email it to yourself, save it to a USB, whatever you want to do, print it if you'd like to, all that kind of great stuff. So that's one way you can find probate records here. You can also just do like an all collections search. So I could do that. And then I can again kind of narrow it down if I didn't want to go through the card catalog. I could do that and narrow it down to the court, land, wills, and financials, and then narrow it down to wills, estates, and guardian records. I would obviously maybe be a little bit more specific in whatever I'm searching here, but just showing you that, other results pop up in here for that name. And then you can dive into that record for this person. And you can see, oh, this is listing a child here. So this isn't actually his probate record, but it's somebody else's record, and he's listed in it. So again, you can dive in and see what this probate record contains. Any questions on Ancestry Library Edition and finding those probate records on there?
Does it include newspapers.com? So like if you get a link to a newspaper
So
article?
you will see newspapers.com listed in Ancestry Library Edition, but you have to use them separately. So we do have newspapers.com through the library edition, through the library, but you would want to pull it up in a separate window. So you'd find it here in this genealogy and local history area. So I'd have it over here. And I can click into it. And so say it pops up with a certain name, I would want to search that name here. Because if you try to click on it in Ancestry Library Edition, it's going to try to tell you you need to subscribe to newspapers.com, even though it might be freely available on the library edition.
The newspapers.com you can use from.
The library edition, yes. Yep. Ancestry Library Edition you cannot use from home, but newspapers.com library edition you can.
If a person, say, lived in Washington State their whole life and would have probably filed, maybe have filed a will in Washington, but then retired or whatever, moved to Florida and passed away in Florida, would they have had to create a different will? Would their will in Washington?
If they owned property
Oh,
or had things to distribute, well, if their will was filed in a different state.
and then obviously they sold the property, if it's just a house, and they sold the house and then they moved to Florida. And then,
They might have had to settle like the probate in Washington to prove that they had nothing left in Washington. If they had property at one point and sold it, that's a great legal lawyer question. I don't know all the ins and outs of probate and why they do things that way or how they do things that way, but
it could be one. Fine.
yeah, I would always search outside the box. Like if you knew that they lived in different places, probate could have happened in any one of those places. So definitely search around. Don't just narrow yourself to where they died or it could be where they owned property. So maybe they still owned property in other places. Let's see what else I got. All right. Remember, not everything is digitized and not everything is available online yet. So if it's not digitized, you can check the Family Search Wiki to see where probate records are located in that specific area and that specific time period you're researching. Might still be at the courthouse, might be in an off-site storage somewhere, might be at an archive, might be at a state archive, might be with a genealogy or historical society. Every place is different on what they do with their probate records. So for example, here in Wisconsin, we have different area research centers all throughout the state that are at our four-year UW college campuses, where they have the older probate records. So they might be microfilmed probate records. They might be bound ones in big books. They might be loose paper files. So if I remember correctly, certain ones like from pre-1980s for certain counties they have at those area research centers. But those more current ones that are from the 1980s on are still going to be at the county courthouse. And you always want to double check before you go visit there that they would have that specific file that you're looking for or index that you're looking for or cover that time period that you're looking for. Some online sites exist, of course, for the libraries and societies. Maybe they have online indexes to those probate records. So always remember that acronym SLAMmed that I've talked about a few times. Societies, libraries, archives, museums. You always want to check those locations in that location where your ancestor would have lived because they might have the pieces of the puzzle that you need to locate that probate record. I always try to search an index before I go, especially if they have an index online, because it means then I can find that case file a little bit quicker. If I already have the case number or that volume number or page number where it is, saves me time when I'm there. If you can't go there and research in person where they might have it offsite, some places might also send you copies of the file, usually at a little cost. Some might only charge you the cost of the copies to print them and mail them. Some might charge an hourly research fee. Some are just nice, and will look up things for you. A couple years ago, I reached out to the Jasper County, Iowa Genealogy Society. They offer a service where they snail mail you a copy of a probate record, and it was a lot cheaper than the cost of me traveling there to drive and get a hotel and do the research myself. So it was well worth the, $20 or whatever it was to pay for that and get it emailed to me or snail mailed to me. As we saw an example of earlier, that part of the probate process is publishing notices in the newspaper, to let those creditors and debtors know to come forward, or those family members to come forward. So you might find a lot of those in the newspaper as you're searching in newspapers.com or some of the other resources. But you might also find other smaller newspaper articles listing like the cases that are being heard by the probate court that day. So go ahead and search some of those newspaper sites like newspapers.com, Newspaper Archive, Genealogy Bank. We have lots of other newspaper resources. Again, we talked about those really in depth last year. So you can go to our Genealogy Jumpstart page at apl.org/genealogy jumpstart to get those videos that we had last year all about the newspapers and searching in the newspapers. But these are some examples of what you might find in those newspapers. So again, something like this that's a legal notice, you're likely going to see copies of this within the probate packet. But you can see it's basically, again, being that notice that, hey, we have this will, we're going to hear it on this date, and you got to come forward if you have any interest in this will. But you might get something like this. This is not going to be included in the probate packet. It's talking about, all these different cases. So the estate of so-and-so, the estate of so-and-so, about the guardianship of this person who, is a minor, the estate of so-and-so. So all these people are listed in here because these are the cases that they're going to be hearing on that specific date. So this might also be another way that you can learn when your ancestor would have been having their estate in probate. That's all I've got for you. Next month, Tuesday, April 21st, 2 p.m., we're going to talk all about land records. In the meantime, we have our next Find Your Ancestor session on Saturday, April 11th at 2 p.m. It's all about crossing the pond. It's going to be successful strategies for researching Eastern European ancestors with Lisa also. So join us for that. That one's going to be a hybrid one as well. Happy to take any additional questions you guys have.
So at what point do these newspaper notices become obsolete and antiquated?
I don't know if they still do newspaper notices with probate now or not. I have no clue. I don't think, yeah. They might still have a little section where they have to have it. I mean, legally they do have to publish some sort of notice somewhere. But if places don't have a newspaper anymore, I don't know how they handle that. That's a great question.
The other thing is, what direction or how far has digitizing come, say, in the last 5-10 years, and where is it going, and how? I mean, obviously that's an area that's going to be accelerating extremely
Yeah,
fast.
more and more stuff continues to come online every single day. So
As far as technology, how is it different today than it was? I mean, used to be just flatbed scanners. I mean, now there's got to be other ways.
Now they have lots of ways to like you've got overhead scanners, they've got higher power scanners that can, depending on kind of the medium that is the physical form, if it can go through like a feeder or something really quick. Some of these probate packets, like if you look at the original, some of them are like super folded, and like you have to kind of unfold them very carefully and put a weight on it to kind of hold it down. So something like that you couldn't put through a feeder, you'd have to do like a flatbed scanner or an overhead scanner. But they've got volunteers all over the world that are, digitizing more and more genealogy records. As far as kind of court cases and legal stuff goes, these probate packets and like the wills are some of the things that are more easily put online, or more put online than some of the other court cases, just because they know that this is a little bit more genealogical significance than some random court case where your ancestor is suing somebody. So this is usually where you're going to find your ancestors in the court records for sure, is the probates and wills. But more and more continues to be online. So if you don't find it online today, check back in a year or two and maybe it's there. But I know even the ones I showed you as an example today, I went and got the original ones, many, many years ago when it wasn't online and now it's online. So if you want to be patient and wait for it to come online, you can. Otherwise, go see if you can find it offline if you don't want to wait. It's going to be a long time before every single thing is online. Let's see. Someone says in the Netherlands, the provinces quite often have full copies of wills and court records on their website, and many are indexed. So, yeah, that's helpful if you have ancestors in the Netherlands. All right, let's see if there's a couple other questions here. Are recent probate records accessible, or is there a specific amount of time that has to pass before they are accessible? I think it depends on the specific state. Like if a probate happened, 10 years ago and I go down to the courthouse and ask for it, it depends on if they're available as public records or if they still, consider that private or if they're only let you see a certain part of it. It depends on the state and what their rules are or their laws are. All right. Anything else, guys? All right. Well, I hope to see you April 21st. We're going to dive into land records, which is a ball of fun. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.